Hi everyone, ever wondered what happens if your API in one region goes down? In this demo, I'll show how CloudFront can automatically fail over between two API gateway endpoints in different regions. Let's start by looking at the diagram. Here we can see we have a CloudFront with origin group enabled. In origin group, we can see we have primary and a secondary origin, where primary origin is in US East 2 and the secondary origin is in US West 2. In the origin group, we will be setting a rule where we will trigger a failover on 5xx errors. For this demo, we will be using HTTP status code of 500 to trigger a failover. On the bottom left, we can see we have Amazon API Gateway used as a primary origin in US East 2, and again Amazon API Gateway is used as a secondary origin in US West 2. Inside of our primary origin, we can see we have an HTTP GET method with /status resource name path, which will be created. We will be using a mock integration for our both primary and secondary origin. In terms of the response HTTP code, we will be using HTTP 200 for our normal case, whereas we will be sending HTTP 500 intentionally for our second case called failure case. For the API gateway in secondary origin, we will have a similar HTTP GET method associated with /status resource name. Here again, we will be using mock integration and it will have a response with HTTP 200 status code. Now let's look in the case 1 scenario where our primary origin is healthy. User sends an HTTP request to the CloudFront, and CloudFront with origin group rule will route the request to our primary origin in US East 2. Here our primary origin API will mock the integration and will return a status code of 200 back. In the origin group, we are only triggering a failover on 5xx error. So when it gets 200, it doesn't trigger the failover. So it returns the response as a final response to the client. Now let's look into the case 2, where our primary origin fails. Again, user sends an HTTP request to the CloudFront and the request comes to this primary origin. Here again we will mock the integration, but now we will send an HTTP status code of 500 back. Since we have failover rule with 5xx error, 500 will trigger a failover, so the same request will be sent to this secondary origin. Here in the secondary origin, we again mock the request and return a response with HTTP status code of 200, which will be sent back as a final response. With the diagram in mind, it's time to test it live and watch CloudFront handle failover in real time. Now that we are in the AWS console, let's open API Gateway. Let's open API Gateway in two tabs since we will be creating two different API gateways in different region. In the first tab, we can see we are in US East 2 region. So let's click Create an API. Let's scroll down and click Build under REST API. Let's give this REST API name. Let's choose a security policy as TLS 1.3. So let's click Create API. We can see we have successfully created an API called Primary API US East 2. Let's click Create Resource. In this resource name, let's enter status as the resource name. Let's click Create Resource. Now let's click Create Method. Under method type, let's use get. Let's select mock for integration type and click Create Method. Now let's go to the Integration Response tab and click Edit. We can see we are currently sending HTTP status code of 200. So let's move to this mapping template. Content type will be set to application JSON. Now let's enter template body. So let's paste this as a template body. where we are specifying that this API gateway belongs to US is2 and this is primary origin response. Now let's click save. Now let's refresh this page so that this deploy API button gets enabled. Now let's click deploy API. Let's choose new stage. Let's call this stage prod. Click deploy. Now we can see we got invoke URL. So let's test this invoke URL. We will be appending /status. We got back HTTP status code of 200 with the message region US is2 and message as primary origin response. So our API gateway in US is2 region is working correctly. Now let's move on to the second tab. Before clicking create an API, let's move to our second region US West 2. Now let's click create an API. Click build under REST API. Let's give this API a name. Let's select the security policy as TLS 1.3 and click create API. Repeat the same process. Click create resource. Let's put resource name as the status so it creates a resource path called /status. Click create resource. Now click create method. Let's select method type as get. Let's select mock as an integration type and click create method. Let's go into this integration response tab. Click edit. We can see we have response code of 200. Under mapping templates, we can see content type is set to application JSON. So let's paste in our template body. So now in template body for our second API, we are sending a JSON response with message failover origin response. Let's click save. Refresh this page. Now click deploy API. For stage, let's select new stage and give this new stage a name called prod. Please remember that the stage is unique for API gateway. So even though for the previous API gateway we gave it or deployed in the stage prod, it's different from this prod as stage name are unique for API gateway. So let's click deploy. We see for this second API gateway we got our invoke URL. So let's test this. Let's append status. We see we got a different message back with HTTP status code of 200 and with a different message failover origin response. So both of our API gateway in different AWS regions are working correctly. So let's move back to the console. And let's open CloudFront from the console. Let's click create distribution. Let's select pay as you go option. Click next. Let's give this distribution a name. Let's click next. Let's select API gateway as an origin type. Under origin, we need to select API gateway origin. So let's click browse APIs. Here, let's choose REST API. For the region, let me select our US East 2. So that will be Ohio. So let's select our primary API US East 2 API gateway. Click choose. For path, let's add /prod. Click next. For WAF, let's select do not enable security protection for this demo. Click next. Click create distribution. Right now we are in a deploying state. So let's wait till it gets deployed. Right now we see that it has been deployed. Now let's move to the origins tab and add a second origin by clicking create origin. Under origin domain, let's select secondary API US West 2. For origin path, let's enter /prod and click create origin. Now we see we have two different origin, one for primary and one for the secondary. So let's click create origin group. Under origins drop down, Let's select US East 2 as primary and API gateway in US West 2 as secondary. Now that we have added both of the origin, let's give it a name. For failover criteria, we will use status code of 500 and click Create Origin Group. Now let's move to the Behaviors tab. Select this default behavior and click Edit. Under Origin and Origin Groups, let's select Demo Failover OG under Origin Group. Now let's click Save Changes. Wait till our distribution gets deployed. We see that we have successfully deployed our changes to the distribution after we made change to our origin and origin group. So from the details tab, we have this distribution domain name. So let's copy it and let's move to the terminal to call this endpoint. Let's append status to the URL. You see we got back status code of 200 with the message region US is 2 and message primary origin response. So we are hitting our primary origin. Let's call this endpoint multiple times to see our response. You see primary origin response again. A message of primary origin response. You see for all the requests we hit the primary origin as we are never triggering our failover rule. So now let's move back to our console and simulate our failover. Let's move to the API Gateway Stages console. Here under Resources, let's select Get. In the integration response, for now, we see we are sending an HTTP status code of 200. So it will never trigger a secondary origin. Now let's change our default response from 200 to status code of 500 to see if our secondary origin gets called. Let's move to the method response tab. Under method response tab, let's delete this by clicking delete. Now we have successfully deleted our response with 200. Now click create response with the status code of 500 and click save. Under integration response, let's delete our default response by clicking delete. Again click create response and click create with method response status code of 500. Now we can see our primary origins API gateway will return status code of 500, which should trigger our secondary origins API gateway. Scrolling to the top, let's click deploy API. Deploy it to the stage called prod and click deploy. We see that we have successfully deployed the changes. So let's move to the terminal and see if CloudFront fails over to the secondary origin now that the primary is returning a 500 HTTP status code. Indeed, CloudFront detected the 500 error from the primary and automatically routed the request to the secondary origin, which returned a successful response of region US West 2 and message of failover origin response. So that's how CloudFront Origin Groups enable automatic failover between API gateway endpoints across regions. We saw the normal flow, simulated a failure, and verified the failover in real time. If this helped you understand CloudFront failover a bit better, give the video a like and subscribe for more AWS hands-on demos. Thanks for watching.